first Friday prayers under the Taliban and under the shadow of guns, a plea for unity from the Imam preaching to Afghans not to flee. But desperate mothers pass on their babies to US soldiers amid scenes of utter despair. Here the Prime Minister gives his full backing to his Foreign Secretary, criticised for his handling of the crisis. Also on the programme, the convicted terrorist who went on a stabbing spree could have been stopped. And one new mum's long journey back from COVID ending in the happiest of reunions.
The moment when I saw my son for the first time, honest to God, it was a magical moment. I just couldn't believe my eyes.
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. Gunshots and cries for help filled the skies over Kabul airport today as the scramble to flee Afghanistan continued. Frantic crowds of men, women and children are still heading there, hoping to find a way to escape the Taliban's rule. In contrast to the chaos, there was calm at mosques around the country as its new leaders called for an end to the exodus. From Kabul, our senior international correspondent John Irvine has this report.
The first Friday prayers of the new dispensation here. It was worth checking out attendance levels at one of Kabul's biggest mosques. It's likely the turnout this week was bigger than last week because in between this country became the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The ceremony was conducted by a Taliban imam who was flanked by several gunmen. A sight that was intimidating or reassuringly strong, depending on your faith and point of view. It's likely that today the Taliban had the biggest audience since seizing power in Kabul on Sunday. In almost all Afghanistan's 160,000 mosques, the same sermon was preached: forgiveness and equal rights for all communities. 6 days after their takeover of Kabul and the Taliban are still preaching forgiveness, only today they are using what is in this country the most important pulpit of them all to convey that message. The sermon also included an appeal to fellow Afghans to work for the development of the country rather than try to leave it. But at the same time, that's exactly what many Afghans were still trying to do. The road to the airport remains busy and chaotic. In a country that has endured 40 years of civil war, people barely batted an eyelid at the relentless sound of warning shots meant to quell things. Closer to the entrance gate, Western soldiers used flashbangs in a vain attempt to bring some sort of order. At the point where Taliban-controlled Kabul meets the US-controlled Kabul airport, the anguish is palpable. "Help, help," yells a girl. "The Taliban are coming for me." The sight of mothers giving up their children to the embrace of American soldiers says it all about the desperation to leave here. This evening, 2 American warplanes appeared over the city. A warning to the Taliban not to impede the evacuation. On the ground, an atmosphere of uncertainty lingers. The shock of Sunday may have subsided, but Kabul has become a twilight zone of competing hopes and fears. Among the people daring to leave home for the first time was Mina, who said she had expected to see the city completely destroyed and was relieved it wasn't. As evacuation planes continue to leave, Taliban fighters continue to arrive. Afghans with no hope of getting out are getting on with things, still on tenterhooks of course, treading carefully among new rulers, wary of apple carts and upset. John Irvine, ITV News, Kabul.
Well, here the government held more emergency talks over Afghanistan today. Speaking this afternoon, Boris Johnson gave his backing to the Foreign Secretary, who has come under pressure over his handling of the crisis. Our political reporter, Shihab Khan, is at Downing Street. Shihab, does this mean Dominic Raab's job is safe?
Yeah, well, as you say, the Prime Minister says he has his full confidence in the Foreign Secretary, but the truth is it depends on whether or not there will be any further revelations, because we know how quickly pressure can mount. Now, the Prime Minister, if you remember, this issue actually started because the Foreign Secretary was on holiday when he was advised to call his counterpart in Afghanistan, something he delegated to a junior minister, and that call ultimately didn't happen. Now, the Prime Minister has given his full confidence. Today, he also said that there is no cut-off point for the support that will be given to the Afghan people. Have a listen to what he had to say during an interview a few hours ago.
Our plan to help people with the resettlement programme will run for a good while to come. So I think what I'm trying to say to you is it's a mistake to think of the end of this month or the beginning of September as being a cut-off point for our involvement and our willingness to help.
Now, the plan, I'm told, is to try and help the Afghan people for days, weeks, months, maybe even years. But Number 10 sources tell me a lot of the plans that they are currently drawing up depend on the support that is provided by the United States. If you remember, they provide a significant portion of the military support that is currently in the Middle East and in Afghanistan in particular, and the plans will be dependent on that. Now, I'm told that the commitment that has been put forward is very similar to the Syrian refugee commitment. It is something that the government is going to be working on for a significant period of time.
Right, Shihab, thank you. Let's go back to Kabul and to John Irvine, who a short while ago told me about the challenges faced by people trying to leave Afghanistan.
Well, Lucrezia, the evacuation process remains haphazard, messy and disjointed. To get to the airport, Afghans with or without Western permission for safe passage have to negotiate several Taliban checkpoints. If they're successful, and it's a big if, they then have to get to the entrance gates manned by Western soldiers like our paras, who then have to enter the melee and try to filter out those Afghans with permission to fly from those who don't have permission to fly. So British soldiers who thought they were coming here to provide security are now having to make critical, agonising, possibly life and death decisions about people's fates. Looking at the overall situation here in Kabul, there's still no news of a new unity government. The Taliban have promised inclusivity, but they presumably don't want to surrender too much power to other ethnicities who in turn don't want to just be fig leaves in any new administration. So overall, the situation in Kabul tonight is confusing, messy and worrying.
Our senior international correspondent John Irvine reporting from Kabul. Moving on, and it's emerged that Plymouth gunman Jake Davison, who killed 5 people last week, was allowed to keep his shotgun after admitting assaulting 2 youths in a park last September. The police watchdog said Davison's weapon was only taken away from him in December. It was returned last month after he completed a voluntary intervention programme. Now, something we've often heard about after terror attacks here is missed opportunities to prevent them. An inquest jury today concluded there was one before an attack in South London last February. Convicted terrorist Sudesh Aman was released from prison 10 days earlier and was under surveillance when he stabbed 2 people on a street before being shot dead by police. John Ray reports.
His reign of terror lasted little more than 60 seconds and ended amid panic and police officers who shot him dead. And while the suicide bomb found close to his body was fake, the carnage craved by Sudesh, a man who swore allegiance to ISIS, was all too real. And yet, the day he planned mass murder, he might instead have been back behind bars. He was already under armed police watch. They were just a few metres away as he came sprinting from a shop with a stolen knife, stabbing 2 passers-by and spreading terror as officers ran in desperate pursuit, before he turned, knife in hand, to confront the firearms team who shot him dead in self-defence. The inquest was told that a man was one of the most dangerous extremists investigated by police and MI5, a troubled young man enthralled by a hate-filled ideology. He'd served half of a 40-month sentence for terrorist offences. In prison, he'd mixed with Hashim Abedi, jailed for the Manchester Arena bombing, and Ahmed Hassan, who'd tried to blow up a London tube train. But less than 2 weeks before the attack, under rules then in place, he was released early, despite police appeals to extend his sentence. A little more than a week later, he was seen buying materials that could be used to construct a hoax suicide bomb. Senior case officers then met to decide whether to recall him to prison, but the probation service decided he hadn't broken the terms of his licence. The jury called that a missed opportunity, though they cleared the police of blame for failing to search a man in the moments before he struck.
Police had real concerns about this attacker, both in relation to his extremist mindset and also what he may do on his release from prison. It is for this reason that we employed and he was monitored by a very professional and a highly skilled team. It's for this reason that they were in the right place at the right time to intervene and stop this becoming a murderous attack.
This ain't real.
It is good fortune that his two victims recovered from their injuries, and little comfort that a man could have inflicted much greater pain. John Ray, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Summer saves our resorts, but people living in cities face hard times. And the remarkable recovery of a mum who gave birth after she caught COVID. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. Research for ITV News has revealed which parts of the country will be hardest hit when furlough and the universal credit uplift are scrapped in October. Well, several places near the top of the list are outer London boroughs like Brent, where many cafe and restaurant workers live and are still furloughed. Big cities like Manchester and Birmingham also feature, as do airport towns like Luton, where the travel industry's struggles have been particularly acute. But the sharp increase in staycations means seaside resorts such as Blackpool are bucking the trend. And it's from there that our business editor Joel Hills begins his report.
Alive and illuminated, Blackpool has its sparkle back. As Britain staycates, tourists have flocked here and the resort is unfurloughed at pace. 1 in 14 workers in Blackpool are on the job retention scheme. In the darkest moments of this crisis, it was 1 in 3. Funny Girls is back, along with its cast and crew. This show has survived thanks to hard work, persistence and a lot of taxpayer support.
It is Las Vegas on heat, Blackpool at the moment. It's just gone berserk. Upstairs and these seats are all fully booked up to Christmas. We're just...
You're fully booked all the way to Christmas?
All to Christmas, yeah.
Blackpool is bouncing back strongly. Luton is not. This town's fortunes are tied to its airport, which is open again, but 1 in 4 staff are still furloughed. This is supposed to be peak season. On a normal August day, 350 aircraft would come and go at Luton. Today there are just 168 scheduled. There are fewer flights and fewer passengers on them.
Double S World Choice, Steve speaking.
At Luton's last remaining high street travel agent, bookings are down 98% on pre-COVID levels. The owner says they'd be bust without the job retention scheme, which ends in 6 weeks' time.
How many employees have you got on furlough?
All of them, 5.
How many of them can you afford to take back at the end of September?
None is the honest answer.
You seem...
emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to let my staff down.
From Luton to London, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation says the capital is more exposed to the withdrawal of government support than any other part of the UK. Brahmin Rabi lives in Brent with his 4 children. He's a single dad who was made redundant just before the first lockdown last March. He's been claiming universal credit ever since and has this message for the Chancellor.
Please, if you put your foot on my shoes, you feel the pain, feel how much single parents are struggling. A lot of people need that when you quit. It's hard.
The government says it has protected those on the lowest incomes the most during this pandemic, and its priority is helping people back into work. Brahim says he wants to work, but he doesn't know how long it will take until he can stand on his own 2 feet again. Joel Hills, ITV News.
The Scottish National Party and the Scottish Greens have announced a power-sharing agreement formalising a pro-independence majority at Holyrood. It takes the Greens into government for the first time anywhere in the UK. 2 of their MSPs will become ministers in Nicola Sturgeon's government. Coronavirus infections have declined slightly in England and Scotland, according to the latest figures, while Wales has seen a small rise in cases, while science editor Tom Clark has been looking through the data. So, Tom, what more can you tell us? What do you make of it all?
I mean, decoding this, it looks like overall the picture's pretty flat. Cases are neither going up or down in any particular direction. You could argue that's a good thing. Great, you know, we definitely don't want to see more COVID. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is we'd love cases to be going down a lot more than they are. You know, schools have been out for a long time. We hope mixing would drop off. If you compare case numbers this week to where they were this week last year, they're 25 or more times higher than they were. The only reason hospitalisations and deaths aren't up there as well is because of the vaccine. Lots of uncertainty about what will happen in a couple of weeks' time when schools go back. Things could get considerably worse. That's one concern. That could be bad for people who are unvaccinated and unprotected, given the vaccines are working to keep people out of hospital. The message from health officials really is get those vaccines out. Chris Whitty tweeted today, while we've all been on holiday, he's been working in a COVID ward for the last 4 weeks. The majority of people now in hospital are those who are unvaccinated. It's your biggest risk of getting COVID right now, and that's what I want to do, is fill in those gaps in the vaccination coverage.
OK, all right, Tom, for now. Thank you. The world premiere for the much-delayed James Bond movie has been announced nearly 2 years after it was originally planned. No Time to Die will be shown at the Royal Albert Hall on the 28th of September and will then be released in cinemas 2 days later. It will, of course, be Daniel Craig's 5th and final outing as the iconic spy. And finally this evening, how one new mother's determination allowed her to start making up for lost time. Hajra Aslam caught COVID while she was pregnant and went on to be put into an induced coma after giving birth. But doctors were amazed when, after just 11 weeks of therapy, she returned home, where she told Rebecca Barry the thought of holding her little boy speeded up her recovery.
It's over. It's over.
For Hajra, moments like this are especially precious. COVID stole her first months of motherhood.
When I woke up, I was confused. The moment when I saw my son for the first time, honest to God, it was a magical moment. I just couldn't believe my eyes.
When Hajra was 35 weeks pregnant, she got coronavirus. Her son had to be delivered by caesarean. Hours later, she was placed into a coma. It was 2 months before she saw her newborn son.
Presumably you wanted to hold him, you wanted to cuddle him, you wanted to feed him. Could you do those things?
I couldn't do any of those things. I couldn't hold him myself. The nurses helped me to hold him. I couldn't feed him either. All I wanted to do was be with him and, you know, do everything that new mums do that got taken away from me.
Steady and stand.
There followed months of intensive rehab. At 28 years old, she had to relearn to walk, while her son was cared for by her husband and family. Her motivation, maternal.
He was my end goal to, you know, recover. I was just focusing on him. I kept on saying his name. I kept on seeing his picture. He was my end goal. I was going to go home to him. I'm going to be a mum, no matter what. Are you mine?
Huzaifa is 7 months old today. They're both busy making up for lost time. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
A remarkable recovery, and what a lovely ending. And that's where we end. That's all we have time for. Charlene is here at 10:20 tonight. But from me and all of the Evening News team, bye-bye. Have a lovely evening.